The Three Stooges made 190 films between 1934 and 1957. They were famous. Everyone knew their faces. Theaters rioted when studios tried cutting their segments. Yet for 23 straight years, their paychecks barely changed. But there was something else. Rumors spread about a secret ledger, a book that connected studio profits to people who operated outside the law. Some say the Stooges saw that ledger. Some say that's why they never fought back. What was inside those pages? And why did three of the biggest stars in comedy live like they were one mistake away from vanishing? It all began in a small backstage corner in Brooklyn, and the moment felt simple at first. Mo Howard was doing a vaudeville show in 1922 when he bumped into his childhood friend Ted Healey. Healey looked tired and frustrated because he needed comedians for his act. His whole routine depended on a drunk character who kept getting interrupted by his stooges, and he didn't have enough performers to pull it off. When he saw Mo and his brother Shemp fooling around with cigars and joking like they had been doing it forever, something clicked for him right away. He asked them to join, almost without thinking. They said yes, not knowing this one decision would shape the future of comedy. Soon Larry Fine joined too, bringing his violin and odd charm, and suddenly the act felt complete. That meeting in Brooklyn created a spark that kept growing as the group discovered the rhythm of chaos together. And people kept showing up because they loved watching these men turn disorder into laughs. As they carried that spark forward, something bigger happened in 1930. Ted Healey pitched his act to a Columbia Pictures producer named Harry Cohn. Cohn didn't like what he saw at first. Healey's singing bored him, and he didn't understand why this group should be on film at all. Still, he allowed a test screening. The audience changed everything. They didn't care about Healey's songs. Their attention stayed glued to the fights, the pokes, the slaps, and the wild energy coming from the Stooges. The room shook with laughter, and Cohn watched it happen with sharp eyes. In that moment, he understood that the real gold was not Healey. It was the raw, violent slapstick coming from Mo, Larry, and Shemp. That single screening shifted the direction of American comedy shorts. Because once Cohn realized the Stooges were the heart of the act, he started planning a future without Healey. While all this was happening, the chaos of real life created another turning point. One night in 1933 at a wild party, Ted Healey got drunk and punched Mo in the face. Mo punched him back without hesitation. They rolled across the floor, wrestling while everyone around them watched in shock, until someone laughed and said it was funnier than their actual show. That comment stuck. It opened a door in their minds. They realized that the physical violence, the sudden movements, the surprise hits, and the messy reactions could become the center of their comedy. After that night, they began shaping their routines around eye pokes, hair pulls, spins, flips, and the exaggerated sound effects that eventually defined them. Audiences loved it. Columbia loved it. That brawl became the blueprint that carried them into their next era. Then, everything shifted again on January 5, 1934, when Harry Cohn forced a split. Healey wanted more money, far more than Cohn was willing to pay. Cohn refused and pulled the Stooges away from him, signing them as the Three Stooges. It should have felt like a victory, but Cohn was ruthless. He kept them underpaid for 24 years. He never revealed their true financial success, never gave them a raise, and kept them insecure enough to stay loyal. Even so, this new contract gave them something Healey never did. It gave them freedom. They finally controlled their own act, and that freedom let them explore the humor that became theirs alone. Soon, it was time for their true launch. That moment arrived when their first official short, Woman Haters, premiered on May 5, 1934. The film was shot in just 18 days for $10,000, which was almost nothing in the studio world. Yet when it hit theaters, audiences loved it. People came back again and again for the trio's rhythm and speed. The short became a stepping stone for Columbia's future, and it proved slapstick could live on the big screen with a force that no one had expected. This success placed the Stooges in a position where they could build a legacy that grew stronger with every project. Behind the scenes, their personal stories kept adding depth to the comedy the world eventually saw. Mo Howard's famous bowl cut wasn't a joke at first. As a child, he cut his hair that way after his mother had given him a hairstyle that triggered teasing from other kids. The bowl cut helped him hide his embarrassment, but later it became a symbol of who he was on screen. When he auditioned for Ted Healey back in the early days, he even had to take real punches from Healey to prove he was tough enough. That moment built the foundation of the aggression he carried into the act. Larry Fine's past shaped him too. When he was 4, he almost drank oxalic acid from his father's jewelry shop. His father knocked the bottle away just in time, but the acid splashed onto Larry's arm and burned through his skin. Doctors encouraged violin lessons to strengthen his damaged muscles. Larry practiced until he became good enough to compete in amateur contests. His gentle personality, paired with the pain he carried from childhood, made him perfect for the role of the confused victim in the trio's routines, where chaos kept landing on him over and over. Curly Howard's path was just as wild. When he auditioned in 1932, he had long ginger hair and a mustache, but Ted Healey insisted he shave everything off. Curly hated how he looked afterward, but he agreed. Then one day, while playing cards with Larry, he got so excited that he accidentally poked Larry in the eyes. The moment was shocking and funny, and it became the birth of the most iconic gag in their history. Curly's bald head, his awkward energy, and the eye poke all came together to create the version of him that audiences adored. Their rise continued when Woman Haters premiered on May 5, 1934, and instantly outperformed Columbia's average by 32% in its first week. The studio had been struggling and needed a hit, and this 11-minute short helped pull them out of a financial hole. The Stooges became the heartbeat of Columbia's short films. Their success was so strong that Harry Cohn later admitted they kept the short subject division alive for decades. Curly's childhood injury added another layer to his legacy. When he was 12 in 1927, he accidentally shot himself in the ankle while cleaning a rifle. The wound healed badly, leaving him with a limp. Instead of hiding it, he exaggerated it on screen. Audiences fell in love with it, and by 1935, Punch Drunks made him the centerpiece of the trio's appeal, increasing repeat audiences by 40%. A painful accident became a piece of comedy history. By 1936, the Stooges reached a peak few could match. They released 27 shorts in a single year, far more than any other team. People loved them so much that when theaters tried to cut their segments, riots broke out. They brought Columbia an extra $2 million each year, making them the studio's strongest moneymakers. But not everything was smooth. In 1937, 14 states banned their shorts because people complained about the violence. Bookings dropped by 32%. Mo mortgaged his house, and Larry sold his violin just to survive. Even with the censorship, fans never stopped craving their work, and Columbia kept them protected because they knew the Stooges were irreplaceable. The controversy only made the trio more legendary. Ted Healey stepped into the night outside the Trocadero in Los Angeles on December 21, 1937, just hours after celebrating the birth of his son, and the evening felt like it should have been joyful. Instead, voices were raised, drinks were flowing, and a heated argument pushed its way out onto the street. Witnesses later talked about actor Wallace Beery and a group of men who looked like wealthy college boys with the wrong friends, boys who might have been connected to people who handled problems in the shadows. Moments later, Healey was on the ground, bloodied and unconscious, and those men were seen fleeing. The next day, he was dead. The official report tried to quiet the violence and claim natural causes, which made everything around the scene feel darker, as if someone bigger than the truth was standing in the way. The autopsy only added to the confusion. There were no clear fractures, no major internal bleeding, and yet the cause of death was listed as acute toxic nephritis from alcoholism. Even Healey's own doctor refused to sign the certificate because the story did not match what he saw. The coroner admitted the body had been released too early, before a full examination could be done, as if someone wanted the questions buried before they were asked. People who knew Healey insisted he had taken a beating that night. They remembered his injuries. They remembered how he looked. It felt like the coroner's ruling existed to protect someone, not to explain anything. That possibility grew when the mob angle crept into the story. Healey had argued with Pasquale Di Chico, a man tied to Lucky Luciano. There were whispers about insults, affairs, and old grudges that never healed. Healey's connection to Thelma Todd only tangled the web deeper, especially since Todd had her own links to Luciano. Days after Healey died, someone broke into his home and took $10,000, a number too large for a random thief, a number that felt like someone knew where to look. With every detail that surfaced, it became harder to believe his death was a drunken accident. It began to look like payback. The Three Stooges felt that fear more than anyone because they had worked under Healey for years, and they knew how quickly a person could vanish in Hollywood if the wrong people wanted it. Harry Cohn of Columbia Pictures had his own reputation, one wrapped in control and connections that stretched beyond movie sets. The Stooges believed Healey had been killed over money, over demands, over stepping out of line. They never sued for what they were owed. They never asked loud questions. Silence, for them, became a kind of survival. Albert Broccoli later said he saw Wallace Beery hit Healey that night. He would go on to produce James Bond films, but he never let go of what he witnessed. His admission stood in direct conflict with the official explanation. Still, no arrests were made, no charges filed, and no one in power seemed eager to look back. The moment passed like a secret sealed shut, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a sense that the truth had been buried on purpose. The money story that followed was its own tragedy. Harry Cohn signed the Stooges in 1934 and paid them $1,000 for their first film, split 3 ways until it barely looked like a paycheck. Even when their shorts became wildly profitable, even when the studio was pulling in numbers that soared year after year, their pay stayed stuck at $7,500 per film. For 23 years, the figures barely moved. They made 190 films and never saw a salary that reflected their success. Mo Howard later said they worked with the fear that if they complained, they would be replaced without a second thought. That fear was enough to keep them quiet. Cohn insisted their films lost money. He claimed the shorts were barely worth producing. He would renew their contracts at the last possible moment to keep them insecure, never letting them believe they were safe. As long as they stayed grateful, he stayed rich. They lived week to week while the studio thrived. They could not negotiate long-term. They could not demand a share of the profits. The contract was a cage they never managed to escape. In 1937, when the studio temporarily banned them, they fell apart financially. Mo pawned his watch just to buy food. Larry survived on whatever he could find, even dog food when things got desperate. While they were struggling to eat, the studio continued to make money from their old work. The power imbalance was so strong that even returning to their jobs felt like a defeat. They had no choice but to accept. Rumors spread about a secret ledger that connected Harry Cohn to organized crime and hidden profits. The Stooges were said to have seen it. They understood that speaking out would bring consequences they could not survive. The memory of Healey's death was fresh enough to warn them that people who made noise sometimes disappeared. Their silence became the safest answer in a situation that never felt safe. By 1957, after 2 decades and 190 films, they were fired. There was no back pay, no severance, no acknowledgement of the years they spent working under contracts that never matched their worth. Columbia moved on, and the Stooges were left with fame that looked like success from the outside, but never paid like it. Their story became a lesson in how talent could be used up and tossed aside once its purpose had been served. The personal stories behind their screen personas were just as painful. Larry Fine had carried the memory of drinking oxalic acid in 1915 when he was still a child, a mistake that damaged his arm and scarred him forever. His parents pushed him to play violin to strengthen his muscles, and the instrument became both therapy and destiny. The experience shaped the softness in his screen persona, the vulnerability audiences recognized without knowing why. Curly's limp came from a gunshot accident when he was 12. It never healed properly. Surgery scared him, so he hid it with an exaggerated walk that turned into one of the most famous comedic movements in film history. He carried the pain quietly. The audience only saw the joke. Mo cut his own hair as a child to stop bullies from mocking him. The bowl cut was rough and uneven the first time he did it, but it became part of who he was. It followed him into fame and stayed with him until the end, because it represented the moment he stopped letting other people decide who he was allowed to be. Larry Fine lost a sibling young, and grief clung to him. That sadness softened his edges, made him the emotional core of the trio. People laughed at his misfortune on camera, but something in his eyes always looked like someone who already knew how loss felt. Even the iconic eye poke grew out of a real fight in 1932. Shemp jabbed Larry during an argument, and Mo thought the moment was so absurd that he brought it into their act. The comedy that made the world laugh was built on real pain, real injuries, and real memories that never faded once the cameras stopped rolling. In January 1940, something wild happened inside a tiny Hollywood studio, and it started with three men who never took anything seriously. The Three Stooges released You Nasty Spy, and the moment it hit screens, you could almost feel a spark running through the country. It was loud, it was silly, it was fearless, and it arrived 9 months before Charlie Chaplin even began filming The Great Dictator. The timing mattered because America was still trying to stay neutral, and studios were terrified of angering Hitler. Yet here came Mo, Larry, and Curly, turning him into a joke with a fake country called Moronica and a dictator named Mo Hailstone. Their slapstick routine carried something sharper than anyone expected. Word traveled quickly, and soon stories began circling about Hitler hearing of the film. People said he was so furious, he added the Stooges to his personal death list. The list has never been made fully public, but enough historical whispers and references exist that the idea never faded. The Stooges, three Jewish comedians, suddenly found themselves mocked by millions and hunted by a dictator who took jokes far too seriously. The short was filmed in just 5 days, from December 5th to December 9th, 1939, and when it premiered on January 19, 1940, people instantly realized it wasn't just another goofy comedy. It was satire dressed in chaos. The Stooges played paper hangers who accidentally became rulers of Moronica, and the nonsense that followed was a direct hit on Nazi politics. It worked because the Hays Code rarely bothered with short comedies, which gave them a kind of freedom feature films did not have. Still, isolationist politicians were not amused. Some accused Hollywood of trying to push the country into war, but audiences loved it. They loved it so much that a sequel, I'll Never Hail Again, arrived in 1941 and strengthened the Stooges' place as early anti-Nazi voices. They were showing people how absurd fascism looked by simply messing around on camera, and that type of courage mattered more than anyone expected. Behind the jokes, though, something darker formed. Years later, when Gestapo files surfaced, people pointed to references that placed Mo, Larry, and Curly on Hitler's death list. They were Jewish, and they had mocked him publicly, so the hatred aimed at them was sharp. Chaplin received threats too, but the Stooges went on performing without adding bodyguards or slowing their schedule. Their bravery almost felt careless, but it came from knowing that comedy could punch holes in fear. They kept touring, kept performing, kept throwing pies and insults, even though they knew their names were being whispered in Nazi files. And while all that was happening, they pushed themselves into the hardest wartime job entertainers could take. During Defiance, the Stooges performed hundreds of USO shows. Sometimes they gave 7 shows in one day, racing from camp to camp, hospital to hospital, standing in freezing tents or dusty fields, making exhausted soldiers laugh long enough to forget where they were. They barely slept. They barely rested. In 1944, Curly collapsed on stage from exhaustion, a frightening reminder of how much they were giving. Yet they didn't slow down. They believed their silliness had a purpose, and the troops adored them for it. Their courage came from something personal. Moe and Curly were Horwitz brothers. Larry Fine was a Jewish kid from Philadelphia. They knew what Hitler represented. They knew exactly why mocking him mattered. Most big studios were silent. Most executives were careful. But the Stooges pushed forward, stepping into a fight with nothing but slapstick weapons and a refusal to stay quiet. Their films became small acts of defiance. Every eye poke and every nonsense speech chipped away at the image of a man who tried to terrify the world. And because they dared to laugh first, millions learned to laugh too. Still, the danger on screen didn't compare to what happened behind the camera. Their set was chaos on top of chaos, and the pain was often real. In 1943, during the filming of Gem of a Jam, Curly fell off a table and smashed his head on a windowsill, splitting his scalp open so badly he needed 9 stitches. He went back to work within hours, still bleeding under the makeup. Directors like Jules White pushed the Stooges through stunts that no comedy team should have attempted. Moe ended up with broken noses, twisted ankles, a tooth cracked from a bad hit, and once even 3 broken ribs from a fall in 1935. Instead of stopping, he hid the pain for 2 weeks and finished the scene before collapsing. Their slapstick wasn't pretend. It was real bruises, real cuts, real fear disguised as laughter. Even their early films turned dangerous. In the 1934 short Three Little Pigskins, they were supposed to play in a football game with real NFL players. After Curly broke his leg in another stunt, and Larry lost a tooth from a mistimed punch, the Stooges refused to do the football sequence. 3 stunt doubles took their place. What happened next was brutal. The NFL players tackled so hard that 2 stuntmen and 2 photographers ended up with broken limbs. The director sat down with his head in his hands afterward, stunned by the carnage. After that day, the Stooges insisted on stunt doubles for the most dangerous scenes. Even the harmless pie fights hid real danger. The studio reused pies from the floor to save money. Some of them had nails or wood fragments stuck inside from broken props. Curly once took a pie to the forehead and came away with a cut that needed stitches. In Heavenly Days, a fountain pen thrown at Larry during a gag stabbed into his forehead. Moe lost his temper and chased the director off the set, but the scene made it into the film. Larry finished the shot with blood dripping down his face because stopping wasn't an option. Their dedication was intense and sometimes heartbreaking. Curly's health grew worse over the years. After his head injury in 1943, he was stitched up and back on camera within hours, a wig hiding the wound. Sets were so cheap that there was no medic around. Injuries were ignored until they were unbearable. Curly kept performing because he felt he had to, but the damage built up, and it followed him for the rest of his life. Then came one of the strangest stories in Hollywood history. On November 22, 1955, Shemp Howard died from a heart attack after cracking a joke in the back of a car. The Stooges still had 4 short films left in their contract with Columbia Pictures. Canceling was not an option, so producers did something unforgettable. They used old footage of Shemp and hired a stand-in for new scenes. This trick became known as fake Shemp. Fans didn't know. Audiences never guessed. Jules White, the producer, spliced together Shemp's last performances with careful editing and clever blocking, making it appear as if he was still alive. Joe Palma, a small background actor, became Shemp's double, He appeared in at least 16 scenes across the 4 remaining shorts. Rumpus in the Harem, Hot Stuff, Scheming Schemers, and Commotion on the Ocean. Palma was always filmed from behind, or the side, or with props covering his face. Sometimes, all you saw was his arm or his back. Old audio clips and facial reactions were cut in between. It worked so well that fans didn't realize for decades that Shemp had already passed away. Years later, filmmakers started using the term fake Shemp to describe any situation where a stand-in replaced a missing actor. Directors like Sam Raimi even included nods to it in their films. Hollywood adopted it because the stunt was so bold and so strange that it became part of movie vocabulary. Mo carried guilt for the rest of his life. He insisted that Shemp's real final scene appear in the last of the fake Shemp films, Commotion on the Ocean. It was a quiet way to say goodbye, a way to give his brother one last bow in a career built on noise and laughter. That final cameo wasn't a trick. It was a farewell, hidden inside a short film that most people watched without realizing how much emotion lived inside those few seconds.